Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Babe Let's Join a Cult. Today we are here with the Babe instead of the Gabe,
The one and only.
the one and only. Today is going to be more how our episodes will typically be formatted with a cult case. I know the first episode we were just talking a little bit about cults in general, but today is our first case that we have for you. I'll be telling Babe about it a little bit
Let's see what I think.
and
See if
see
you can
what
get
you
me to
think.
join.
I just want to hear your input on it too.
That's exciting.
But today's episode is brought to you by Tea Tree House. Go give her a follow on Instagram, and also Impulse Media House. Also give them a follow on Instagram.
That's me.
And stick around to the end of the episode to hear more about them and some discount codes.
Let's hit it.
Yeah. Anything you want to say before starting into
Do I
the
get my own little spotlight moment? Based on what I had to say on the 4 tries that we started off, this is number 5 now.
Well,
I
like
probably shouldn't talk.
I was gonna ask, babe, you were here videoing the first
Mhm.
episode. You were kind of behind scenes as me and Gabe were going, but was I know you were just biting your tongue the whole time. Was there anything that you wanted to say regarding cults or anything we covered, or just anything to kick off your first episode?
Not necessarily. I think it was awesome. I think just for everyone watching, we had this idea now probably a week and a half ago, 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
ago at max. And so we really just threw ourselves right into it, and I kind of pushed her into it just to get this going and get this created. And I think that adds a really unique element to this process that it's kind of on the fly.
Yeah, I was
And
not
we're
ready for the
learning,
first episode.
yeah, and we're learning as we're going, we're creating as we're going. As amazing as this looks, this is our living room, in case you were wondering.
If you're watching on YouTube.
Exactly. Or anywhere that has video. So it's a trial and error process, and we are grateful for everyone who's listening, everyone who's being supportive, everyone who is a part of this process with us.
Oh yeah, and we've
And
had
yeah,
so much support already. It's
it's really cool.
insane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah. Thank you big time.
Totally, totally. So that's really all I have to say to everyone watching. Thank you. And take it away, babe. Let's dive into a cult.
All right. Well, for the first cult, let's just start with the episode. This is episode 2, technically, of Babe Let's Join a Cult, and it's titled From Dancer to Disciple.
Ooh,
Ooh,
the double D's.
the double D's. No.
Pretty much.
So I chose this cult because it's an infamous cult. And I had many people guess that because I put like a little tag on Instagram. And I was like, hey, you guys, like, what's this episode going to be about? Can you guess? And many people guessed right. It's an infamous cult. I think everybody kind of has a rough idea or like an awareness of this cult case. And it lays out and shows a lot of those characteristics really well that we talked about in the first episode, just characteristics of a cult, the leaders, the followers, and whatnot. And so I think it's a great case to kick things off with because it's got everything that makes a classic cold case.
Hmm.
And it went down in history. It's still talked about today. It's an insane case. It's
Yeah.
got a whole lot of parts to it.
Absolutely. Ooh, one thing I do want to add to that is it's one of my favorite sayings, but oftentimes when we look back at history, we always assume the side of the victor. We always assume the side of the person that was righteous or did the right thing, or in war, the country that did the right thing.
Mhm.
However, you want to, like, whatever situation or circumstance that falls under, do your best to put yourself in the shoes of the people that end up following a cult leader, or that end
Mhm.
up um, convinced and manipulated by someone's charisma and degree of conviction. Attempt to put yourself there, and every time I do, I find out a little bit more about me and about, like, wow, there are moments in my life where I totally would have been swept away
Oh
by
yeah.
someone else.
I
It's
feel
so easy not to do that. It's like
no.
we always just assume, like, damn, I wouldn't have done that. How can someone do that? And it's like, open your mind up a little bit to the possibility of how that could have come to be. And you'll be able to connect to these stories in a way that you wouldn't have if you were just trying to be superior to them. And I think
Mhm.
it's fascinating that way.
Yeah, and with that being said, I do think that like everybody is susceptible to these moments in their life where they may join a cult because it's not like it's broadcasted. This is a cult. It's going to be really bad for you. We're going to treat you horribly. We're going to do all these things. It's not like that when you're going into them. it's presented as something that you've been looking for and kinda like an answer and something that makes you feel whole, wherever you are in your life. So I think most everybody is susceptible at one point of their life, one point or another point in their life to join a cult. And I know people are like so unaware of that. And like you said, they're gonna be like, oh no, I would never. But I think you would.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, and there's so many things that we find that are described as cultish,
Hmm.
and there's a reason they're cultish. They may not properly be defined as a cult. However, their ideologies or the group think around them or the momentum that's carried with them are culty, where people get swept away. And I think it's because so often the like your goodness is preyed upon.
Oh yeah.
It's like there's a level of you're not good enough unless you do this. And I mean, countries do it, politics do it, workplaces do it. There's this cultish style of behavior that goes into it to try and get people on board with a vision or an idea. And oftentimes that does produce successful results. And it's important for everyone to kind of get on the bandwagon of an idea. And we're specifically talking about the moments where a particular person does that, thus exploiting the group
Hmm.
and the resources and the circumstance. And that's, I think that oftentimes we separate ourselves from that. And it's
Hmm.
like, all of us fall victim to that.
Oh yeah. I mean, even researching this case, as like horrible as it is, and like the outcome of it, in the beginning, reading about it, like reading about the early stages of it, I was like, wow, like if I were 18, anywhere from like 18 to late 20s during this time, like even right now, I'm 23, and reading about it, I was like, I mean, if this crossed my path, I probably would have hopped on that bandwagon
Hmm.
because it looked fun and it looked cool, but
Right.
it had a way
Hmm.
darker ending.
Yeah, in the last podcast, y'all mentioned that your 20s are really that time for cults because you're looking to identify yourself. You're
Mhm.
looking for out in the world, you're kind of fresh and the world is new, and you're deciding who you are and who you want to be in the direction you want your life to go. And that's prime time for any sort of new idea to really plant itself and root itself. And for most of us, we're lucky that it wasn't a cult,
Yeah. Like for
honestly.
us, it was a podcast.
I had a little bit of culty experiences. It's like mine were more surrounded or intertwined with self growth.
You totally had a lot of culty. I feel like you were in a cult and you probably just didn't
What's funny,
notice.
a lot of the stories, a lot of cult behaviors are around yoga or they're around some sort of spiritual enlightenment, spiritual path.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a reason for that. It's like we're all looking for this evolutionary process, and oftentimes cult leaders exemplify that, or they offer like I'm the one that'll lead you to your salvation type of behavior.
Mhm.
And especially early on, it's kind of like I want to figure something. I want to be better.
Yeah,
I want to
salvation
grow.
or like higher wellness or like
Totally,
this is a
absolutely.
better way to live your
And
life.
I'm the only one that can get you there.
Yeah.
That's the unique part. Like that's really what sets itself apart. And I want to point out too that businesses do that, governments do that, political leaders do that. They always like they say that I'm the only one that can do this. And I understand the humanness in that, and I think that's probably what has allowed me to separate or have one foot in, one foot out, and not be too consumed by them. But to say that I didn't participate in some culty things would be a lie.
Mhm. That's true. Are you gonna keep your headphones on for all
Well, I
this?
have to
I just
monitor the
noticed.
audio, so
Okay.
I'm half producer, half participant, co-host here.
I was just you were talking and I was just staring at the headphones and I
I
was
can
like, "Are we
probably
keeping
take
those?"
them off, but I might leave them on. This guy, for the record, this couch is really small,
I love this
and
couch.
she's attached to it, so we have it.
Yeah, but I was just getting cozy. We're comfy cozy cult today.
Comfy, cozy, cold.
Yeah, and Blake's wearing my sweatpants, which
Yeah, I really like her sweatpants. I don't know
I'm
if
supposed
anybody
to
else
steal
out
your
there has a
sweatpants.
girlfriend, but they have really comfortable clothing. Mine are like too official. They're too professional. Yours are, you know, they're just worn and they're comfortable.
That's because I wear them a lot.
Do you want to trade?
No, because these are the same ones, just a different color. Because if you like it,
Fine.
you buy it in all the colors.
Girl math.
Girl,
Okay,
I
enough
want
enough rambling. Go for
okay.
it. Let's hear something cool.
Alrighty. Picture being young in a world so unknown and new, seeking relationships such as family, friends, all while trying to discover who you are. Searching for that purpose and identity in a world where you can feel so small. Many of us have experienced this, and maybe are currently experiencing this. As a young adult, finally able to step out of your childhood lives and take on the scary outside world all on your own, all while at the peak of susceptibility to influence. It can seem invigorating and full of possibilities. Possibilities that you may not know can lead to your downfall, and the end of your short lived freedom. Dramatic. Dun dun dun. Well, that was exactly the case of Susan Atkins, a young woman in search of a new life that in only 2 years resulted in conspiracies, chaos, and a cult. Susan was sentenced to the death penalty in 1971 at the age of 23, the result of choosing a path down a road that many of us may have followed given the opportunity, and unfortunately, it resulted in corrupt ideologies, violent conditioning, and a life behind bars. Susan Atkins was born on May 7th of 1948 in San Gabriel, California. Sadly, she was burdened with a troubled, unsteady household from a young age. Susan's mother dies when she is 11, further separating her relationship with her alcoholic father, and she begins drifting through life. By 18, Susan moves to San Francisco, kicking off her newfound freedom and taste of adulthood. She works various odd jobs from waitress to topless dancer in order to support herself on this journey. In the summer of 1967, 19-year-old Susan was working her shift at the club where she performed as a topless dancer. Tonight, like others, she is noticed by the charming man who occasionally visits the club. His charismatic energy is magnetic to her young mind, and she can't help but feel she is finally beginning her new life when he invites her to join his group on their travels. Charismatic energy, magnetic energy, draws
Yep.
you in.
Yep. Being a stripper.
Topless dancer. By the fall of 1967, barely an adult, full of excitement for what awaits, Susan Atkin finally believes that she has found the love and acceptance that she's been searching for. She quickly leaves her job and her life behind to follow Charles Manson and what would become the early members of the Manson family to begin a nomadic lifestyle traveling across California in an old school bus.
I would have done it.
I would have done it. That sounds
Absolutely.
great.
Some guy walks in and he's like, "Hey, sweetheart, you tired of stripping? You want to hop in a van with me and a bunch of people and we're going to travel around?" I've been like, "Fuck yeah."
And
Absolutely.
it was a different time. This was the '60s, and they called it, like, the summer of love, like, that
Mhm.
era of love. So
I know people currently who are in vans traveling around
but
the
you know what I
United
mean? Like,
States, you know?
now you might be a little more skeptical if someone was like, "Hey, get in my bus and travel with me and my friends,"
That's
but
fair.
back then, like
Especially at a strip club. I'm sorry,
yeah.
a topless dancing club.
The early startup of the Manson family was Manson was let out of prison and a bunch of other stuff, but basically, like, they got an old school bus and turned it into a traveling bus, and they were traveling down California, just kinda picking up random, like, people to join their group and just living, like, a cool, chill, nomadic lifestyle in the '60s.
Sounds great.
In the following spring of 1968, Susan, along with the other members, settled on an abandoned movie set in Southern California. Saf Ranch? I don't know if I'm saying that right.
No. Safranch?
Saf Ranch.
Huh. Thought it was called something else.
That
Spawn.
huh?
Spawn?
Spawn Ranch?
Yeah.
Well, it's spelled like oh.
SPANH.
We're gonna have to edit that
We
out.
just found out my girlfriend's dyslexic.
So dyslexic. You have no idea how hard it was to spell that.
That's great.
Spawn?
Surprise. Yeah, Spawn. It's okay. I
Surprise.
mean, feel free to pronounce it however you want.
Spawn
Mhm.
Ranch?
This will be a highlight for sure. Spawn Ranch, yeah.
Okay.
Spawn.
Anyways, they settled on this abandoned movie set in Southern California. Spawn?
Spawn.
Spawn Spawn Ranch. Manson pushed towards living as a community away from the outside world. Spawn Ranch was the perfect place for this. Susan, along with the other members of the group, were soon to be referred to as the Manson family. Ooh. I just want to point out two things. Since this is our first episode and we kind of had that, the last episode was just talking about characteristics of a cult. One, we already have like a charismatic, just amazing energy leader guy.
Talk about me.
No, Charles.
Charles.
And two, we already have kind of in isolation happening.
Mm-hmm.
This group of people, the Manson family, have settled down on like an abandoned set in the desert,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of far off from outside society.
Totally. So I'm trying to paint this picture a little bit, which is that you're a stripper, you get picked up by an attractive, charismatic,
You're
kind guy,
18. You're 18 years
and
old.
you're 18, a huge factor, right? You go on this awesome adventure, you're traveling around California,
You're
everything's
meeting these
great.
cool
You have
people.
a cool community of friends. Now all of a sudden you get the opportunity to crash at this cool spawn ranch.
Hmm.
And it's like an old movie set. Everything's rad. Like you're having a great time.
Yeah.
There's nothing necessarily weird going
And
on.
this is like your
yeah,
first time being like
you're just being a
in the world on your
vagabond.
own.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just traveling around, being a vagabond, being a dirtbag. Like totally cool.
Hmm. Music was a large part of the Manson family. Charles was considered to be a talented musician and even wrote a song with Dennis Wilson, one of the Beach Boys. And he wrote a song with Dennis Wilson because I guess I have it written down here. Because on their travels in the bus, they like stopped and they crashed. Like the group crashed at Dennis Wilson for
Mm-hmm.
a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and wrote a song together and jammed together. But the Beach Boys weren't a big fan. The other
Oh
Beach
yeah,
Boys.
and they were staying with him for a while, and then I think
Hmm.
the other Beach Boys were like, "Yo, this guy's not
Yeah,
good."
and they're like, he's got to
Yeah.
go. And then so they left. The family gatherings often involved music and singing together. So music was like a huge part of their community. Unfortunately, Manson was rejected by many in the musical field and ultimately considered to have been a failed musician. Later on, this supposedly played a huge role in igniting like that spark of Charles' paranoia. The family lived in isolation, shared resources such as chores and responsibilities. Manson encouraged the family to reject traditional societies and mainstream norms. This resulted in the members further separating themselves from cultural norms and societies. Members would often dumpster dive, avoid jobs, and stockpile resources such as canvas, knives, and parachutes because they believed that it would benefit them for life in the desert. There were also some information that they were like getting dune buggies to take out to the desert. Yeah, I saw like a clip of them like driving them, but how many dune buggies? I don't know.
Mm. We don't have an exact count on the number of dune buggies, but we heard it was a lot.
No, I just thought that was
They
random.
were trading their dumpster dives for dune buggies.
Dune buggy
That's like the
life.
guy that goes like, "Here's a quarter," and he ends up with like $1 million house.
Yeah, but that's multiple
The early
trades.
days. That's really where Charles Manson's genius lies.
'Cause he got there before
he
the
was
economy.
he was acquiring dune buggies.
Members went as far as abandoning their identities and assuming different names. So Susan Atkins soon began to go by Sadie Mae Glutz or Sexy Sadie. I'm gonna keep referring to her as Susan though because it's easy. Any like trial or any interview you look at, she's under the name Susan Atkins, not Sadie. But like all the members switched out their names. They all had different names. Uh, Heavy drug use was pushed on the members of the family. Susan, along with many others, were constantly high off of an assortment of drugs. LSD and other hallucinogens were most popular and highly encouraged by Charles Manson. So there you go, hallucinogenics.
Yeah, absolutely. The fabric of reality starts to take different shapes, and it's a
Mhm.
little more malleable, and someone's influence has a greater effect.
It was also the 60s, so
Also, LSD was new. Everyone's like, "Whoa, there's more to life," you know.
yeah.
And that's the same train this whole group is on. Is that somewhere in all of us? I mean, I can speak for myself. I have absolutely participated and dreamt more of freedom, the opportunity to just escape, go travel, go experience something new. That's where these people are at, and they're young.
Hmm.
Totally makes sense. And then you throw in drugs on top of that. For sure.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Have you?
I haven't, but I know you have.
I've been there.
I have not been there.
Been there a couple times.
All my friends have
Yeah,
been there.
yeah, that's what happens.
Ooh, okay. So, while on these drugs, Manson would interpret the trips of members, claiming their spiritual enlightenment and like telling them what their trips meant. So, like, they're easily manipulated by this, obviously. He would often hold sermons stating his apocalyptic prophecies and glorifying violence as a divine act necessary to overcome the threat that he soon envisioned, all while they were on LSD. Like, he would get them on drugs, tripping,
Mhm,
and then be like, "Okay, I gotta
and then do a sermon.
let me hold a sermon."
Oof,
Mhm.
that's intense.
I
That would be a lot.
Little did Susan know that these extreme dosage dosages
There you are.
wow,
Way to go,
dosages
you really worked through that one.
of
I'm proud of you.
drugs were all just a part of Manson's manipulation. Manson, like the others, would indulge in these drugs, but unlike the others, he would take smaller dosages to ensure that he could hold persuasion over the family and some sort of level of consciousness, um, and like control within himself. So these people were all super high, and he was high as well, but like on a different level. So he
Which
could use
is
that
yeah,
to his advantage.
which is to his benefit because when you open up, at least you crack into that egg, you're able to articulate yourself better. You can connect things in a more abstract way and find your way through. Whereas if you're so high, you're kind of just like a sponge absorbing everything.
Hmm.
It can be really, really dangerous.
Sounds like someone's been there.
Yeah, I've been that high. it's it's like hitting the reset button. It's like you like halfway through, I'm like, I am a child right now. My brain is just like everything is new, and I'm like, wow, yeah, completely redefines whole reality.
I'm sure.
Come out of it a little shook.
I've heard. Along with communal living, rejection of society, and extreme drug use, Susan, like many of the others, began viewing Charles as a Christ like figure. Susan surrendered her autonomy to Charles, yes, and gave him absolute control. She, along with the other women, were subservient and performed tasks to maintain their approval with Charles within the group. Charles further pushed his power by using sex as a tool to further manipulate the group, requiring them to participate in orgies and using sexual relationships to secure loyalty. Susan loved that Charles promoted free love, but in reality, he even held the say in who could engage in sexual acts with who. But this was the summer of love, like free love and all of this, so he was kind of playing off of that to justify some of this stuff. Ooh, where things take a little bit of a darker turn.
I think too, before we go on, is that he doesn't have a lot of resistance to who he's becoming and the way that he's influencing this group of people. You
Mm.
know, there's no one being like, "Hey, man, you're being a dick," or there's no pushback, there's no
Mm-mm. They're
backlash
all
from
just
the
kinda
group. They're all
going
kind
with
of
it.
like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, totally, you're right," you know.
Mm.
And I think hence the isolation, like all of this stuff really starts to connect and make more sense because of how obviously the outcome. If this was a group of people and nothing had happened and it didn't turn into this whole situation, nobody would have really bat an eye. It's like that was a weird time in my life, whatever. But because it evolved the way that it did,
And it got because of, like, what later happens, the amount of, like, press and mainstream media that was in on it was just
hmm
enormous, and that's, like, why it's such an infamous case. There's also so much more to Charles Manson that
hmm
I didn't get into in here because there's just a lot, like, with his upbringing, with his early life, pre-cult, there's a lot that goes into, like, what makes his character and,
hmm
how he became this person, um, which you can there's so much about that, like, on all sorts of different platforms, and there's so many good books on it. I just wanted to kinda take the viewpoint of, like, if I were in this time, if I were, like, this age, like, what would I experience, and, like, how would I have gone about it? Because, yeah, like, if I was 23 and, like, the start of this happened, I'd be like, "Cool, cool, cool," but then once you're in it, you're kinda like, "Well,
Right.
I'm 23 or, like, I'm 18, I can't really leave, what would
And
I
it's
do?"
yeah, and it's your whole life, you know.
Yeah. It's all you know.
Imagine, we don't know Susan's backstory around that,
Mhm.
unless you do, but imagine being that age and you don't have any family, you don't have any support, you don't have any
Yeah, so
financial freedom,
she kinda separated herself from her family before
before
she
okay.
this was before she, like, left to be on her own and, like, be a topless dancer. Her mother dies young. Before her mom even died, her parents were both, like, extreme alcoholics, and it was kinda just a shaky childhood anyway. Her mom dies, um, that further separates any relationship she had with her dad because he's still an alcoholic and, like, of course, the death of a family member, just super traumatic, so she further separates. So then at the time when she left home to begin living on her own, before she met Charles, she had already, like, separated family out.
Yeah, I mean, trauma is the doorway that people walk through to exploit, like you have to have that in. And it sounds like she needed a mother figure, a father figure, and a sense of community.
Mhm.
And she found
And
Charles.
she needed love,
And
and
she
she
needed
needed
love.
fun and acceptance and an adventure, like, there was so much she was looking for. Susan believed wholeheartedly in Charles' prophecies and conspiracies, as did all of the members. Charles often told the group that mainstream moral values were oppressive and hypocritical. Manson voiced an extreme distrust in outsiders and authority figures. He believed that he and his followers would transcend those who were on the outside. As Manson's paranoia grew, his views rapidly began getting darker, taking a strong us versus them perspective. Susan was told that the world was coming to an apocalyptic ending and together they would emerge as leaders. Quickly, members began embracing. I had a spelling error, sorry. Quickly, members began embracing Manson's twisted ideologies. If you look further into Charles Manson's past and just like more into him as an individual instead of like a cult leader, there's a lot of information that like he like was highly paranoid and had a lot of conspiracies. Maybe we can like do a mini deep dive into like just Charles Manson's side. Um he also went through like the system a lot. There's I did find what you were talking about and I kind of researched it a little more. There's suspicion around like the MK Ultra stuff that he could have been a part of with the CIA. That's just suspicion that like kind of rewired his thinking that could lead to this. So he was already just a conspiracy and hyper paranoid of so many things. So I think there's probably always that base level and understanding of like paranoia to outsiders. But as he formed this family, that probably grew quite quickly because like now he has a safe group. Like this was his community that they were going to be on his side. But his paranoia definitely escalated throughout like the course of the cult, which are like I said, we can talk about more sometime
Hmm.
looking at Manson's viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, imagine, especially the drug use. Imagine being high on hallucinogen and you fall down one of those rabbit holes of information.
Hmm.
Granted, we have access to the internet in a way they didn't, but I think it's still information finds a way to circulate regardless. And you're like incubated with this group of people, and it's just you, and you're at Spawn Ranch, and there's no one else having any sort of influence. I totally understand how things could spiral quickly.
Oh, yeah, if you were just around the same people and they're all like, "The end of the world's coming," then you're gonna be like, "Oh, shit, the
Yeah,
end of the world's
absolutely.
coming."
We better be ready.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of ideologies, the most infamous ideology being his helter-skelter prophecy. Manson believed the Beatles' famous song Helter Skelter was warning him of an impending race war. So, Helter Skelter was off the album was called the White Album because it was like a white cover. So, Charles took that as like a race war and he believed that this song was warning him and telling him things that like others weren't picking up on. So he obsessed over this song so much. He would listen to it forward constantly. He would listen to it backwards. He would listen to it sped up, slowed down because he just believed he was getting a message of like the ending apocalyptic war to come through this song. Through
And that's where you lose me. I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from, man. Then I'm like, all right, you're getting a little crazy now,
Yeah, but
a
if
little
you're
wild.
already in that whirlwind of a world, like Susan
For
was
sure.
probably
Yeah.
like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah." And
I wish we had it's like it'd be great to have like personal diaries from these people to be like, Charles was a little outside the box today,
but we're gonna go with the flow.
but we're just going to see where it gets him.
No, and, it was nuts watching her I watched her interviews and then some of the other women, like the Manson girls' interviews, because there were, like there is, like, a group of the Manson girls who were infamous. They were, like, the Manson girls, and just the way they spoke about him later on, they, like, changed, but the way they spoke about him, they loved him so much, he could do nothing wrong, he knew everything, like, his word was law, he was right. Even in an interview where it flashed to that he was, like, grown up, like and in the interview, the guy was like, did you love Charles?" She was like, "Oh, I loved him. I still love him." Like, this lady is grown, this case is old and cold, it's done, and she still loves him.
She's still incarcerated.
No, she wasn't one that was part of
Oh,
that.
oh, really?
Mhm, she
Oh,
was just a
wow.
follower in the family, but
Wild.
she still claims that she
That's
loved him
incredible.
then, she still
Yeah.
loves him, she will always love him.
Wow.
Yeah, and, like, I don't know how old she was in that interview, but at the time of being in the cult, she was a young adult, probably, like, 18. I think most of the girls were, like, 17, 18, 19, like, that age. And then this interview where she's saying that she's if I had to guess, she's, like, in her 50s. Like, she's older. It's, like, it's been done. Susan, led by Charles, began being trained and conditioned for this impending doom, as they believed they were going to be the salvation. Charles often preached that violence was necessary and part of their moral duty. With that, Susan and the family were trained, or I put in little quotes, brainwashed accordingly. During extreme drug induced states, the members were introduced to violent imagery to make it seem surreal, starting that disconnect from emotional reality. Susan and the others were involved in death games that were all targeted to desensitize and diminish natural empathy and instincts from violence and death. This I didn't know about, so like when I found it, I was like,
Yeah.
no way. Because
That's a huge deal.
I thought I knew the case pretty well, just like through things,
Hmm.
but I've never heard of like the death games things. If you have, let us know.
Yeah. Well, that's true brainwashing, and that makes me wonder too, as we brought up his interaction and relationship with the CIA and like all that kind of more conspiracy theorist stuff around Charles Manson.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, this is an interesting bag of tools that he now has access to, where he's brainwashing people who are high on drugs using images to evoke
And like death
different
games and
responses.
like
Yeah,
training and conditioning
totally.
when he
You don't just wake up one day and be like, I have a good idea. I'm gonna get
maybe
you high and I'm gonna show you a bunch of horrible images.
because I know this will desensitize you.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, considering he was just like kind of like a dirtbag that was just in and out of like the system, in and out of jail
Yeah.
his whole
Yeah.
life.
His upbringing does not connect well to what he's basically
Yeah.
the tactics he
He
has
has
access to now.
not a whole lot of education
Right.
throughout it,
Right.
but he was, like, a very charming, smart man, like,
Hmm.
musician, but this was, like, a whole different level that I hadn't heard about.
Mm-hmm.
Often when I looked into it further, I learned more and, like, noticed more people had talked about it, but I guess just, like, what I've been exposed to with the Manson case, I had no clue about this.
Yeah.
I knew they were brainwashed, but I didn't realize there was, like, death games and conditioning.
Yeah. That's dark.
Um, Susan and the others were involved in death games, all targeted to desensitize and diminish natural empathy and instincts from violence and death. These role plays involved simulating murder scenarios, mock attacks, and practicing break ins and ambushes. Members would role play by sneaking into houses and pretending to harm the people in the houses. Manson further tested the boundaries of his followers by encouraging vandalism, petty crimes, and harm to animals. Manson demanded more escalating participation in more violent acts to in turn make larger acts of violence seem less devastating. It was all part of the natural progression. Susan played a role in all of these acts. There were times where she and others would be sent on practice runs where Manson would then gather them to debrief so he could critique them on what they did right and what they did wrong and what they could change. Susan was encouraged to animal cruelty to further strip her moral restraint from empathy.
Wow.
Isn't that nuts? So,
Yeah.
peace loving hippies and free love doing drugs turns into conspiracy and death games and conditioning and animal cruelty and
Yeah, and they're separating, like,
human
creating
empathy.
yeah, creating these external circumstances. He's putting these people in this situation. He is further separating them from themselves.
Hmm.
Them from that internal dialogue that's like, "Hey, this is wrong." You expose that internal awareness over and over and over and over and over to something like this, and all of a sudden it's not that wrong. It is what
It's
it
just
is.
part of it.
And there's a purpose behind it, which is that we better be prepared to fight because this is what's coming.
Yeah, so they're ooh, okay, so they're already separated from their identities. They have taken on new names.
Hmm.
So there's a separation there, a disconnect from themselves. And then that further disconnect with like that emotional human instinct, like
Right.
empathy and like this is bad, this is wrong, this is violent, I don't like this. So that's a further disconnect, but maybe that connection lies like within that different identity, if that makes sense. I'm
Hmm.
going on like a whole thing
Absolutely.
in my
Yeah.
head.
Yeah. Like somewhere in them, they're like, that's not me. Like,
But that's
because
this.
Susan has separated
Susan
Susan
is now
from
Sadie.
Sadie. Like
So
he's basically creating like a split personality disorder.
yeah, so Sadie lacks this
Right.
empathy.
Right.
She is okay with the violence. Um, Yeah, and all while being told, like, the world's gonna end, so of course you're terrified, so you're like, "I gotta do what I can do because
Totally.
we're gonna live through it."
Hmm.
Like, we are the ones making it through.
Yeah. And I mean, like military, army, Air Force, like there's elements to that where you're separating the person who's at home with his family is not the person who's fighting in another country at war.
Mhm.
And he's just doing that in a little microcosm community.
Yeah, in, like, his
Definitely.
twisted lies,
Hmm.
but, yeah.
And then that's oftentimes why you have people who struggle to reconnect to their daily lives when they've gone and they've experienced wars
Mhm.
because that person is active and you're trying to bring that person home and tell them it's okay. You're safe,
Or
chill out. He's like they're experiencing that as he goes through this, except he's now sicking them loose. It's like if you were at war in another country and then you came home and someone was like, go nuts. It's like you're on that rampage. You have that
you're just
desensitization.
programmed and
Absolutely.
desensitized,
You're
yeah.
looking for a fight, you're looking for war, you're looking for a way to use the
Oh
tools that
god.
you've acquired.
Yeah, and you're constantly in that, like, fight or flight, like, that fight area, like, where there's constantly, like, danger, there's constantly something coming at you. Susan often experienced intimidation and punishment by the hands of Manson. Her and others would often experience physical and emotional abuse if there were any signs of disobedience. Members would be called to watch as Manson inflicted his power to further be desensitized to brutality and see the violence that he's causing as normal and a necessary part of control. So,
Dude, he was totally influenced by our government somehow. This is like so what as I
don't
was
get
just
the
in this
podcast
is
taken
like
down.
so what institutions do. he has been institutionalized to then further institutionalize other
Well, he
people.
basically lived in the jail system his whole life.
Totally.
So, he probably
Yeah.
picked up a lot there. But yeah,
Not to lean into conspiracy theories here, but someone was like, "Hey, man,
I'll show you that
this is how
podcast.
you do it."
I'll show you that podcast when we're done of the
Yeah.
conspiracy theory that I found because you'd really
I feel
like
like he
it.
was trained. This is wild. Like it as you're talking, it just reminds me of what happens when you sign up for the military.
So, enforcing punishment in front of the groups to show that that violence was necessary and that it was normal, but also reiterate his standing as leader that no one can disobey him and he knows what is right. So he's holding his ground as a leader and his hierarchy while also, yeah, subjecting them to more violence.
Have you ever seen Full Metal Jacket?
Mm-mm.
Okay. We should watch that.
Okay.
And for those listening at home, if you've never seen Full Metal Jacket or you have, I rest my case there.
Is it a movie?
It is a movie, yes. Yeah.
Okay, we can watch it.
It's a brutal movie.
Maybe we can watch it tonight.
I forget who directed it, but it's a great movie.
We can watch it.
I don't know if it's a go to bed movie. Could be.
Sweet little dreams.
You're desensitized. I beat you often.
It took that a second to kick in. Yeah.
She's fine.
It just wasn't what I was expecting.
We're getting
you to
episode
say.
2 taken down. We might as well keep ripping. I apologize in advance.
All right. Normal, necessary, part of control.
Yes.
Violence.
Yes.
Violence. Um. All right. So, through psychological manipulation, ritualized conditioning, and progressive exposure to violence, Susan and the family were conditioned and trained to carry out the horrific actions of Charles Manson that would lead to the overall downfall of the cult. So, they were trained and ready for this moment. Um, I don't want to go. I'm not gonna go super into it. I wrote a little note for myself here. I'm not gonna go super into the murders that were committed because yes, they were horrible and a huge part of this case, but I would prefer to like go deeper into them in like a separate episode so that I can really give them their full light and talk about it fully instead of just going over it. I feel like it doesn't do it justice. And I also this episode is focused strictly on cult, whereas that's more like true crimey, which I love. I love true crime. So I'd rather do that as a later episode where I can give it the justification and light that it needs. So I wrote a little note about that because it was a truly horrible crime and there was multiple murders throughout like different days that like led to like this huge and they were just all so close together. And yeah, this just shows like what this cult that has only been around almost 2 years has been trained and like what they're capable of and they had no clue.
Right.
This hippie,
Fun
summer
loving,
loving, van living
topless dancing.
cult turned into just terrible.
Man, before they started all this weird army training, I would have signed up.
Calling it that.
Army? Fine.
Death,
This weird
death games,
game.
and apocalyptic prophecies.
Yes.
On August 8th through 9th of 1969, Susan was a key member in the Manson's inner circle. On these days, Susan Atkins, I'm going to butcher some of these names on accident.
Mm-hmm. It's the dyslexia, everyone.
Susan Atkins, Patricia Kernwinkle, and Linda
Kasabian?
Kasabian.
Kasabian?
Linda
Yeah,
Kasabian?
Linda Kasabian.
So sorry. If you look it up, they're infamous for this. You can find their names. I just
Okay. I
can't.
feel like this is your way of getting back at everyone who mispronounced Nikai.
Can't pronounce anything.
Yeah. It's not anyone's fault.
It's true. This is order. This is justice.
Yeah.
I am Nikai. I'm your leader.
Oh, hail Nikai.
They were all under direct order of Tex Watson,
Mm-hmm.
who Tex So these people were under order of Tex. Tex was under direct order of Charles Manson.
So he was Manson's number 2.
Yes, he
Okay.
was like there. There was another murder that I don't discuss in here that was prior to these, where Charles confronted Gary. I want to say it was Gary, but I don't remember. I know Gary was one of them, but I'll have to look. Confronted Gary about something. They got into an argument. Basically, Charles injured him, but Tex then carries out like the final blow and kills him, and like kind of sets the scene. Um, so Tex Watson was ordered by Charles Manson to carry out the murder. Charles emphasized that he wanted excessive violence and chaos during this plotted murder and to make it seem as witchy and shocking as possible. Manson intended for this murder to cover up a previous murder, the one that we were just talking about, but also to further spark the race war by framing a local gang known as the Black Panthers. Manson had also targeted this murder towards Terry Melcher? Melcher, who was a music producer that Manson had previously tried to get in contact with but was denied. Oh, get a contract with but was denied. Uh, that kind of sparked some of his aggression that led to this, obviously. It was a key role in it. He was denied a contract, denied his musical career. Went downward. Um However, the house that they believed, so I've heard two different things. I've heard that they believed that this house where they murdered, they believed it was being rented out by Terry, the music producer. But however, the night that they did this, it was actually being rented out by Sharon Tate and her friends. But then I've also heard that it was just Sharon Tate's house, so I'm a little
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
the movie.
Yes. I believe it's a Scorsese film. I could be wrong, but it's got Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, etc. I believe that Sharon Tate was renting it.
Yeah, like I
Like
think
for the length of that movie. How historically accurate that movie is questionable. I don't know.
all I know
But
is that they believed that Terry was gonna be there.
oh, okay.
That was
Got
the
it.
main thing. So they believed he was gonna be there. That was kind of the target.
Okay.
Um, but it was actually Sharon Tate, a famous actress at the time, who at the time was nearly 9 months pregnant.
Shout out to Margot Robbie.
Did she play her
She portrayed Sharon Tate in
in
Once
that
Upon a
movie?
Time in
I need
Hollywood.
to
Yeah.
watch that
It's
movie.
really good. It's a fantastic movie.
If you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
Comment below if you've seen it and you love it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll watch it tonight. Just wrap up our night with some Manson.
Little Patreon watching party.
I'm gonna need you to help me pronounce these names.
Okay.
Okay, so Tate Sharon and her friends.
Sharon Tate.
Sharon
Damn,
Tate.
baby, I didn't know this was a real problem
It's a
for
real
you.
problem.
I
It's
had
why
no
I don't
idea.
like to read out loud.
Well, you set yourself up for an interesting podcast situation if you don't want to read.
By her friends, Jay
Sebring, yep.
Sebring, Abigail Folger.
I want you to channel your inner cult leader right now and just say these names with conviction, and I'll believe you because I'm not reading it.
No, I can't say that first name.
Wojciechowski?
Frykowski. His last name is Frykowski. I'm sorry, I can't say his first name right.
That's a tough one. I'll give you that one.
And then along with this teenager named Steven who had stopped by to like check on the house.
Okay.
The Manson family carried out a gruesome murder of the group where Susan Atkins had been the one who had stabbed Sharon Tate while she begged for her unborn child's life. And Susan simply replied, "I have no mercy for you."
Wow.
I know.
Damn.
Susan then
Those
wrote,
death games really did a number on her psychology.
Like, I don't, like, in the articles I read, like, Sharon Tate wasn't begging for her life at all,
Mhm.
but just for her unborn child's life because she was 8.5 months pregnant.
Wow, she was big. She was ready
Yeah,
to pop.
like, obviously
Oh my
pregnant.
gosh.
It's really sad. Susan then wrote the word pig on the front door in Tate's blood. The following evening, the family also murdered supermarket executive Lino LeBlanca.
Leno LeBlanca, LaBianca.
LaBianca. Yeah, because it's
Hey,
the Tate and
I got
LaBianca
you. I'm
murders.
here for
I'm
you.
not good at
Okay.
saying things.
I love you. It's gonna be okay.
I know. And his wife, Rosemary, at their home. So there was a lot more to these murders. Like I said,
That was the same night.
the next night.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So the
Yeah.
Tate murders and all of her friends,
Gotcha.
and then the LaBianca murders.
Okay.
But
So then they're arrested.
no,
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 they got away.
no. And what I was trying to say is there was a lot more to these murders. I just wanted to strictly go off of like Sharon's part. I mean Susan's part in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Susan killed Sharon Tate.
Yeah.
Then the arrest, but not like you would think. So during a raid on
During a raid on Spawn Ranch.
Spawn during a raid on Spawn Ranch on October 10th of 1969, Susan was arrested on charges unrelated to the horrific crimes she had committed. Unrelated.
Okay.
Unrelated to the murder.
Okay.
In November of 1969, Susan was sitting with her fellow cellmates in conversation. So, this raid, I believe she was arrested on stolen vehicle charges from a previous murder.
Okay.
Yeah. So, not on the murder. So, she was in conversation with her fellow cellmates. Susan then began to brag about the murders that she had committed, telling cellmates how she had killed Sharon Tate and even tasted her blood. The cellmates later reported Susan's confession to the authorities. Susan, being a young woman who had been living away from society and reason, had just confessed to the murders in a way of bragging.
Sounds about
And at the
right.
time, these murders were like all anyone could talk about, like Hollywood actors and
Right.
actresses were terrified, thinking that there were people all coming to get them. It was just like chaos.
Hmm.
And at the time, like they like kind of framed this gang, so like the police were looking into like the gang and they were looking into like other ways. And little and behold, Susan is like sitting in prison arrested on auto theft charges. And she's like, "Hey, you know that really
Mm-hmm.
crazy murder that just happened? Like, yeah, that was us. And like, I actually
Yeah.
was the one who stabbed Sharon Tate." And her cellmates were
So
like,
dumb.
"Oh, well, this is for sure gonna get our sentence a little easier."
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's I wish that we had like a statistic on how many people end up in jail for a different crime and then tell on themselves to their cellmate,
Hmm.
believing that for whatever reason their cellmate is like their homie. It's amazing.
Yeah. But so Susan was the overall downfall.
Yes.
And I'm sure they would have gotten caught eventually, but she is the reason that the Manson family got caught for these murders.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, along with the other Manson family and Charles Manson, were then arrested for the
LaBianca.
Tate-LaBianca murders. Susan was sentenced to the death penalty in March 29th of 1971. The death penalty in California was later lifted, resulting in a life sentence for Susan. In a later interview, Susan stated that it took her 5 years to fully come back to her consciousness and realize the extent of her terrible crimes that she committed.
Well, and it sounds like for her to finally feel what she did.
Hmm.
You know, like it's one thing for someone to be like, "Hey, you murdered people," and she's probably like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
But then it's like the actual weight of that she didn't experience for 5 years,
Yeah.
which goes to show how deeply, deeply detached she was from her
Super
reality.
detached. And the women who were involved in the murders,
Mm-hmm.
the 'cause Susan was one of them, but like even walking into like their court hearings and like trial, like they're singing together, like, they're
Mhm.
still a happy family, like, they have,
Wild.
like, no care and, like, no sense of reality to, like,
Yeah.
why they're there and what just happened. Susan also stated in many interviews that she truly did not land the fatal blow that killed Sharon Tate,
Mhm.
that it was actually Tex Watson who did it, and she believed that she needed to take part of the blame for him, and that's why she confessed to being the killer. In the interview I watched, it's a couple years a she's still in prison. She died in prison, but she was in prison during the interview, and she talks about how she went to stab another man who was in the house. She, like, tied up his hands, went to stab him. She couldn't do it. Tex took the she got in a fight with that guy because he got out of his restraints. Tex ended up killing him. Then she went to kill Sharon, and same situation, like, she couldn't do it, and
Hmm.
so Tex came over and, like, took the knife and did it.
Tex is just a what a character study he would be too.
Yeah, but she originally confessed that she was the one
Mhm.
who killed her because she believed that she needed to take blame for, like, the family, so, like, not
Yeah.
they were doing this as a family,
Got
not
it.
just one person.
Got it.
Um, they were like, the family was murderers, not just Tex.
Right.
And she also said that she played off of this for a while in prison because she was in prison, surrounded by criminals, and she was
Mhm.
scared, and that gave her some sort of credentials
Mhm.
to where she felt safer and
Mhm.
less likely to be targeted there.
Hmm.
Susan reiterates this statement in later interviews. In a couple interviews I watched, she would reiterate this statement, trying to, like, get it through.
Mhm.
Tex Watson, in his interviews, also states that he is fully responsible for all of the murders, leaving Susan as an accessory.
Hmm.
So he also came around to say, actually, like, none of these people
He's like,
delivered any
I'm
of the
the one.
fataling blows. I did it all.
Yeah. I'm the one who has the lust for killing people.
Mhm. Yeah, and she
Hmm. I wonder how many people did he kill overall? Do you know?
what was, like, the 5, 6, 7 I think it was 9.
Wow.
'Cause it
Damn.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 9.
That's
I
up
could be
there.
wrong.
Yeah. And who knows
Um,
before that too? It sounds like this wasn't his first go. He's
yeah, I don't know, but in the interviews with Susan, she said, because they kinda, like, were like, "Oh, well, you really think, like, one person could take down, like, 5 people?" And she said it was crazy to see him because Tex had, like, this ability to turn into this, like, creature, like, he was no longer, like, a not literally, but, like, figuratively, she's like, he was no longer human. He had, like, this insane craze, like, in his eyes, his strength, he had, like, an inhuman strength. And she talks about it. She talks about it, like, as like, if, like, when people experience, like, these super strength moments, like, that are, like, life or death, like mothers lifting cars off of their children, stuff like that. She explains it like that. She says, "He had a strength that I didn't know was physically possible from a human, and something just took over him." So, Tex Watson was messed up. I would love to also look deeper into him. That
That'd be
could
cool.
be really interesting for just, like, a little mini. I'd like to get more background on him. Especially because he had the capacity to do all of these killings. So, to Susan, she was considered only an accessory because she didn't actually commit these murders, but in all the trials and to all the public, like, she's a murderer, and it stayed that way. Susan's charges were never dropped. She was always denied bail or parole. She had, tried to get parole many, many times, even right before her death, and they just said no every time. Susan was a young woman, new to freedom and what life could be full of. She found her need for love and acceptance in the wrong place, a place that maybe many of us would have ended up in. In a peak time of her life, where you're so easy to jump into adventure and relationships, where you can so easily succumb to influence, there's the unnerving chances that you could end up in a distorted reality, just as she did. Susan died on September 24th of 2009 due to brain cancer in prison. There are interviews of her on her deathbed too, while she was, like just critical, dying of brain cancer. Um, she does feel remorse even in earlier interviews I watched. She became a born again Christian. Um,
Not
sh
surprising.
they all do. She Her only, like, wish in life was just to, like, be let out so that she could marry the guy that she was seeing at the time.
Hmm.
Um, she did express empathy and apologize to the families, like, once she had, like, come to.
Yeah.
She expressed that she understands that no one's going to forgive her and she doesn't deserve the forgiveness for the role that she played, and,
Hmm.
like, no amount of money, no amount of apologies will ever make up for, like, the lives that were taken.
Yeah.
Like, she does show a lot of remorse. It
Did it when you watched it felt genuine?
it felt genuine.
Yeah.
I mean, she overall just definitely, like, seemed off.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, she went through a
given
lot when
given
she
the
was really young.
situation, yes.
Um,
She's had a hell of a go.
yeah, but it did feel genuine. It wasn't really like she was trying to convince the person who was interviewing her. She was more so like, "I know no one's gonna believe it, but, like, this is how I feel, take it or leave it." And, yeah, she constantly, like, showed that remorse and was apologetic towards those actions. The interviewer brought up Charles, like, if she'd had any connection with him, talked to him lately, and she got, like, visibly anxious and stressed, and she was like, "I'm sorry, I don't like to talk about him, like, can we please not talk about him?" And like, said that she'd cut off all connection, but trying to talk about him was still really hard for her.
Sounds like PTSD.
Yeah, yeah, so
Damn.
she had all connection cut, like, obviously struggled at even his name.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sure it just brings back a flood of
Oh, yeah.
images and the realization of what she did, what she was a part of,
Yeah, because
you know?
she experienced physical abuse, emotional
Mhm.
abuse, probably sexual abuse. I know he was kinda, like, pimping out the younger
Oh,
girls
for sure.
to the guys in the family.
Absolutely.
So yeah, she went through a lot of trauma, and
Mm,
then she committed a heinous act that she said is burned into her brain. She can't unsee it. She sees it all the time.
yeah,
She said that she will be happy when the day comes where where that doesn't play in her mind.
yeah, absolutely. Wow.
But yeah, anyways, that was the Manson cult from from Susan's perspective. There is so much more to this cult and so many more people who played such key roles. It would be really interesting to continue further research into it through like eyes of Tex Watson or maybe just on Charles Manson's upbringing and background, some of the conspiracies behind why Charles was the way he was. This is a really small snippet from that cult, and I just wanna make that clear because there was a lot going on, and there's a lot of coverage on it, but I wanted to focus mainly on one person, what they would have experienced, and pull it through because I think we hear so much of, like, Charles Manson, and we for sure hear about the other people, but I wanted to take it more from Susan's life, like, I mean, she had just started her life. 2 years later, ends up in prison, spent her whole life in prison. So she had, I don't know, maybe 3 years of real freedom away from, a traumatic family and away from a cult.
Yeah, and I wonder comparatively, what other people would have been sentenced under those circumstances. I think that there was a ton of pressure because of the media influence and
Mhm.
because of, you
Well, and
know,
she had
the
originally
severity,
confessed
but
to being the one who killed.
yeah, I just think of other people at that time that killed somebody, if they too would have been deemed so
Murder was death
monster
penalty.
at the time.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, but then death penalty was lifted in
Yeah.
California.
I was surprised to hear it in California at that time. I just think of California as it is now, and that's not what it
Mhm.
always has been. So, yeah.
But, um, all of the Manson family members that were involved, because I named a couple,
Hmm.
I think there's, like, 5 that were involved in any of those killings were all sentenced to death and died
Wild.
in prison.
Wild. Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
What you got?
but what I want to touch on is another reason this case is so infamous is because technically Charles Manson didn't technically by his own hand kill anybody.
Right. Yeah.
He harmed one of the first guys. He harmed him, um, but he technically his family, his followers killed for him.
Yeah. Let that sink in.
Yeah, that's nuts. But yeah, that is my little snippet
All
of
right.
the Manson family cult. If you guys have any comments, let us know. Feel free to DM us, comment on the Instagram. You can email us at babeletsjoinacult
Yep.
at Gmail.
Yeah. Babe, let's join a cult, gmail.com.
The Instagram, Babe Let's Join a Cult.
Mm-hmm.
You can find us on Spotify or YouTube.
I'm working on
Which
Apple
oh,
Podcasts
on
too.
Apple? Nice.
And Patreon. We're gonna set that up over time. Takes
Working on
time.
it.
Yep.
Do you have any last inputs on anything?
I don't. I think to reiterate what I said in the beginning is it's interesting to try and understand and try and to relate to these
Mhm.
cult stories that we're going to be sharing. I think that it's a unique element of human nature that these are outliers based on what we culturally accept, and to put ourselves in their shoes to attempt to understand, I think gives us greater insight in how do we, like, once you're able to relate to someone and understand them, then you're
Mhm.
able to sit in a room with them and hold space for that person's reality and that person's existence. And I think that if there's anything in this world we could use now, it's that ability,
Mm.
is to take off our own shoes for a second and be like, how is that possible for this person? Like, that level of curiosity is a beautiful attribute, and I think this podcast allows us to practice that. And I hope that people at home also take that opportunity to be curious.
Yeah.
That's my
Ooh,
thing.
with that, on a similar note, so babe,
Yes,
is this a cult that you would have joined?
absolutely. In the beginning, I would have joined it for sure.
Yeah.
I think if I walked in and Charles was doing some weird, army training shit, I would have chosen out. But in the beginning, yeah, for sure. Just I'm working some dead end job and someone's like, "Hey, you want to get a van and travel around California with me?"
You would still do
Fuck
that.
yeah, I would still do that now.
Yeah, and then once you're in it, it's kinda hard to leave,
Yeah,
but
I
who knows
wonder.
where it would
I
have gone.
wonder what my ability to separate would have been like, or when I would have kind of woken up and been like, "Hey, this is going a direction."
If you would've, yeah.
If I would have, yeah, it's right. Once again, I'm doing it where it's like it's easy to assume that eventually, yeah, I would have been like, "Hey, man, this is wrong," but who knows? I
Mhm.
don't know. I can't say for certain. I want to believe that I would have woken up and been like, "This is incorrect, and I'm not doing this anymore." That being said, I don't know.
Yeah,
I do not know.
I don't know either.
All right.
I'm glad that, like, we kicked off our first cult episode with such an infamous case, and we did kinda reference Manson in the first episode. Or birthday buddies. Um, it's, like, my only, like
Claim to fame.
it's not even cool, though, because he was a horrible person. But yeah, uh, I definitely yeah, Babe would've joined the cult,
I would have joined the cult,
and
everybody.
you heard it here, so let us know, do you think this would've been a cult that you would've joined? And really try and put yourselves in the shoes of Susan in the beginning before all of the crazy, and really sit and think on it for a minute, like, do you think you would've joined this cult? Let us know on Instagram, on Spotify, wherever you're watching, wherever you see us. And yeah, check out Tea Tree House and Impulse Media Film House. And
Yep.
we
We're gonna
will,
have a little sponsor blip coming up after this.
oh yeah, and we will see you guys next Friday for our next cult case.
All right. Have fun, nerds.
Bye. This episode of Babe Let's Join a Cult is sponsored by Tea Tree House Teas, and let me tell you, we've been obsessed. I've been drinking their Vita Long Chai lately, and it's perfect for the season. The Lung Love blend is on deck as cold season kicks in. Tea Tree House makes these unique botanical blends that are gorgeous from start to finish with some serious magic, like their butterfly infusion that turns blue and sparkles. Plus, every tea is ethically sourced, sustainably grown, and packaged in reusable, compostable containers so that you feel good with every sip. And get this, with each purchase, they plant a tree to help protect endangered plants. It's like a small little ritual with a big impact. You can get yours at teatreehouse.com and use our code Babe Let's Join a Cult for 10% off. That's Babe Let's Join a Cult at teatreehouse.com. And trust me, you'll find your new favorite tea so you can be drinking the tea and not the Kool Aid.